Hey y'all, it's good to be back again. It's your girl, Mrs. D Green. I am going to be trying some angle tricks throughout this recording because I record this on my iPhone 14, so my angling, I've been doing it vertical, but I'm trying a horizontal record this time around. And it's playing tricks on me because I have to look at the the camera, like the actual camera, a certain way, and it's throwing me off. So if I like veer here and there, I'm just letting you know now it's because of the way I have the phone placed. It's placed horizontally versus vertically. So we'll see how this goes, okay? It is March 22nd, early March 22nd. It's a Saturday, so it's about 1:09 in the morning. Uh, you fit in what you can, right? You fit in what you can. I had a strong work day, but today I actually took my daughter on a college tour. She's 9, but I took her on a college tour to Spelman. I want to sow those seeds early. And she was sold. She was sold. She was so, into just the layout. She liked that they had market day. She loved the theater arts program. I took her to the bookstore. And she asked a couple of questions in the tour. I had asked her if she can write down 5, and she's like, "Mom," and this is how free thinking she is for a 9-year-old. I was like, "You boy, you want to write down your 5 questions?" And she's like, "Mom, why do I have to write down questions?" And I'm like, "So I know what you're gonna ask." And she's like, "No, I know what I'm gonna ask when it comes to me, Mom." So yeah, she has no issue with being her free thinking 9-year-old self. And I love that. I love that. That's part of my job as the parent, is to make sure she's empowered and confident, right? So she can go out here and rock the world. But nonetheless, that's not what we came here to talk about. We came here to discuss my girl, Bozoma St. John, the book, The Urgent Life. If you go on my Boz the Badass playlist, I actually gave a quick little overview of my experience I had at her Badass workshop here in Atlanta. It was great. It was great. I advise, if you can, if she's ever in your town when she does a tour again, because I'm gonna imagine she's gonna repeat this tour. Just invest that fee in yourself and attend. If anything, you're gonna get a good time amongst some phenomenal people, because it was both men and women there. It's not just women centered, it's for everyone. Great food, great drinks, great music. She had a good DJ. And yeah, like I said, treat yourself to that if you can. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we're now on chapter 6. In this recap, we're going to be reviewing chapters 6 and 7. Now, again, I'm going to remind you it's after 1 a.m., so I am a little tired. I took a nap earlier, but, it's late, so bear with me, all right, on my thought process. All right, so she starts out, and like I've mentioned before, she kind of goes back and forth between time periods in her life. So she starts out chapter 6, and she's speaking about Peter becoming more frail. So he's now back at home, and the countdown is nearing, and he's very sick. So she recalled how that was a very tense time in their life, because she was on edge constantly. She didn't know if he was gonna collapse, or it was almost like she's caring for a hospice patient in her home. So like anything he did, like if he went to the bathroom, for example, for too long, that made her worried. And so yeah, she said she had to kind of just come to terms that that was now their life. And she was just trying to live the best that she could in those final days that they had together. So now we go back to a time after she recalls that period, where she had first moved to New York after graduating college. She said when she first moved there that she didn't have a lot of money, and she didn't have a job, immediately lined up. And because that was her decision to not pursue medicine like her father had wanted her to, they kind of left her on her own to figure it out. But I feel like that's a good challenger, if you look at it positively instead of bitterly, it could change you. It can make you for the better. And it did for her. So she said to make her way until she can find work, she actually stayed with two friends from college of hers. And they were grad students, I believe, and they had a little bit more money than she did, so she didn't have money. But the way she paid for her room and board was by cooking for them. She said the pros and cons to that, though, was of course, the pros, she got to eat for free because they paid for the food, but because they worked, they were only home in the evening, so that was the only time she got to eat. So she just, she recalls that and appreciates that time because it forced her to appreciate the struggle. That's how people grow up to be entitled when they really didn't have to struggle. So she spoke about how so she sourced work through temp agencies when she first got to New York. But, back then, I think this was around when she graduated, it was like late 90s. It doesn't say a date here. But she said there were no cell phones. At least they didn't have cell phone, and they didn't have a landline where she lived with her friends. So she would have to go to payphones to follow up with the agencies, and call every 15 minutes to get updates on gigs. So she was really going out there and grinding. She was grinding, which I think is it's good. We need that for character building, right? But then she said after 6 weeks, she began to feel a little discouraged because she was getting no calls back. And then she also mentioned a lady, because she said what she would do is she would go to a payphone, and there was a diner that she liked to frequent. And just to kind of like, get out of the weather, the elements, the sun, rain, or whatever, she would run there. And she wouldn't have money sometimes to pay for food. So there was a lady that she had developed a relationship with that just randomly one day offered to give her a roll with butter. And at first she didn't want to take it because, she's forging her own path. So she understands that things don't come for free. But then the lady, the more she saw Bozoma show up in the diner, it was kind of like a routine that they developed. So the lady always offered her, the bun, and then eventually she took it. And she dubbed that lady as her fairy godmother because it was like a stranger just randomly looking out for her in the midst of her struggle. So I like that because I could think of a couple of guardian angels that I've crossed paths with when I was coming up myself. So it's always good to, reflect back, right? And treasure the journey that you've gone down. So she said after 6 weeks of searching for work, she finally got a gig at a agency. And this agency was titled DDB, and it was owned by Spike Lee. So she knew that she recognized the greatness in Spike Lee and how grand of an opportunity that was. So she was super excited, but that also kind of put her in a place of, okay, I have to make this impression. So she said on the first day, she showed up at the agency, and we all know, if you don't know, let me not be ignorant and say we all know. If you don't know who Spike Lee is, he is a renowned director in the African American community. He's directed films such as School Days, that's one of his classics. She's Gotta Have It, Malcolm X, Do the Right Thing. I advise you go check out any of those films. But his personality, so he's very kind of aloof, extremely nerdy, one would say, eccentric. Just kind of shows up the way that he is. He doesn't really put on any airs. So I just want you to have that in mind when you think of his personality. So she says she walks into the office. He looks at her. He's like, "That's who. This is who they sent. They sent you." And she's like, yeah." And he's like, "Oh, I expect him, to send Miss America." Not saying it in context of her looks, like, oh, she's gorgeous. He was saying it like, oh, how serious is she gonna be, as a business person? Oh, she's a pretty girl. And Bozoma picked up on that. So Bozoma says she immediately rose to the occasion to run down her credentials. And she said as she was running down her credentials, he kind of just didn't budge and then walked away, went to the office and closed the door. But in that moment, it set the precedent in her to own the room, no matter who you're in the room with. So this is a girl fresh out of college in the room with a known, you know, director, and she chose to own the room, and it garnered her his respect because they continued to have a working relationship for some years to come. So she regards him as one of her you know, career milestones and a good friend. And you know, I like that. Own the room, no matter who you're in the room with. Sometimes I still struggle with that to this day. I'm getting a lot better at it because the more I navigate in rooms, when I have to, you know, do cost analysis presentations and I'm speaking with like directors and VPs, I learned a lot of them don't have the skill set and understanding of what I do. So that's my power that I offer. So I'm learning to be a little bit more confident when I step in that room. So if you're listening, don't be afraid to own the room. Don't be obnoxious. Own it with a purpose. Don't make it all about ego, but don't be afraid to own the room, okay? All right. So she said after working there for a little bit of time, there was a script that Spike was working on, and you know, she got a little bit comfortable, and she asked him if that was a script. And so she said when she asked, she noticed that everyone in the room was like, "Girl, what you doing?" And he was like, "Yeah, it's a script." So then he asked her if she could read it for him because like she recited off her credentials for, don't forget, she was an English literature major and African American studies major, you know, two subjects that go hand in hand with Spike's work. So he felt confident enough to allow for her to review the script. And then she reviewed the script. She said that she gave her feedback or whatever, and she wasn't sure if he took the input, like she wasn't sure how he took the input because she had made some corrections to some grammatical errors and made suggestions and put notes. And so she said he snatched the script, walked away, but later yelled, you know, what did he say? He said, oh, she should stick around because she was, you know, he appreciated her input. And then that's when she said, she never looked back. That's when she knew her career had commenced. She said that her assistant role, because she got hired as an assistant for the agency, eventually evolved into her contributing in a creative way to Spike's work. So if you're interested in the script that she had to read and she made the edits to, it's the film Bamboozled. And you know what? I've never seen that movie, but now that I know she's had a hand in it, I'm gonna go back and watch it. It came out when I was younger, so I had no interest in it, but I'm probably gonna go back and watch that one. All right, but she said, you know, with every happiness, there's always something thrown in there to kind of, you know, mess with us, right, and test us. Working at the agency, and I highlighted a section in the book, so I'm pulling it up now. But there was a VP that kind of gave her the blues there, and she didn't like working for her. So, you know, she had to learn how to weather that toxic environment or working with someone that's always going to throw you a little bit of a challenge. All right, so let me see. Oh, okay. All right, this one. So this next section, now she's going from the agency, now she's flashing forward to her and Peter and her dad and their marriage. So before they got married, this is what led to them getting married. So she said that in her mind, what her father said about their relationship always was an endless loop in her mind, meaning, you know, he protested against the relationship because of their differences. So that is, you know, something that haunted her, and I think did affect their relationship throughout the years. I'll get more into that as I go into chapter 7. But this one, so this is in 2001, and this was around, you know, they're both working at the agency because Peter worked for, the agency was in the same building with Peter's agency, so they worked for two different agencies, but they were in the same building. So this is the actual day of 9/11. And that same difficult boss, she said she remember everyone was like looking out the window and watching people walk through the streets with the ashes on, and like everyone is picking up on the state of emergency that the city is in. And she said that boss told them that no one was leaving the office that day. Can you imagine? Hindsight is 2020, so we're in 2025, and like think back to like the stories and everything we've heard in the documentaries. A boss telling you you're not leaving? Oh, hell no. So she said that she remembered going to Peter, you know, in that building because they worked there, and Peter was like, "No, we're getting out of there." So after that, they were trying to find ways to get out of the city because, you know, they didn't understand what was going to happen. You know, out of fear, everyone panicked, and flights were down, so they couldn't fly anywhere. Um, she said something about, oh, the trains and stuff, so they couldn't go, you know, to like Jersey or whatever, or you know, a city that's closer. So they thought, what's the next best thing? And it was to drive to Massachusetts. So they hitched a ride with some friends of hers that were getting married. And I guess Peter thought, you know, with the incident, you know, life is too short, and he thought, you know, we need to get married. We need to get married. And she said, you know, because she's 24, it hadn't crossed her mind. She wasn't in a mindset of, oh, I need to get married now. But Peter was. So, you know, she honored that, and you know, he ended up proposing to her, and I'll get more into that. But let me get that section. Okay. This is about her father. So, this is on page oh, shoot, I forgot this section. All right, let me go backwards for a second. So there's a section actually on 103. Let me read it, and then I'll explain why I highlighted it, why it stood out to me at the time I was reading it. So I realize now that I always had a keen sense of what I was good at and the areas where I fell short. And being honest about my shortcomings was as important as knowing my talents. I didn't waste energy trying to pretend or bluff. I wasn't embarrassed by what I didn't know, and that enabled me to be super confident about what I did. Basically, staying in your lane, you know, knowing what you have within you, knowing what your limitations are. I do agree with that. I do agree with that. However, I am also of the belief that that's kind of like a comfort zone setting in a way. Yes, have that discipline and that wherewithal to know that, but then don't be afraid to go beyond your limitations too, you know. So I was like, all right, I kind of counterintuitively understand where you're going with that one, Boss. So now this part, she speaks about kind of leaning into her intuition, and this is behind Peter's idea to propose. So she speaks about how, you know, when she was younger, she was always kind of living under the thumb of her dad, like what her dad wanted her to do or whatever. And she says here on page 105, when I was young, I was locked in by my father's dreams. I might have been on my way to medical school if I hadn't broken free. When I shook loose of his grip, I briefly blamed him for almost diverting me from my professional purpose. But now I believe Dad wasn't the problem. It's dreams that hold you back. Not because they're too ambitious, but because they often aren't lofty enough. They go only as far as your imagination can take you. It's intuition that lets you tap into the unseen. When I followed my gut, I found my career. And when I relinquished the space in my imagination I thought only a Black man could fill, I found Peter. So it kind of combines what she was saying, right? You know, she understands her limitations, but she also is guided by her intuition. So I think even with what she's saying, she knows, you know, you have to be honest with yourself. That's one thing. But, you know, be true to yourself as well, and have that relationship with your covenant, and trust your gut. You know, trust that you have like something within you guiding you for higher pastures, greater pastures, even if you know your limitations, because again, we're constantly evolving. So even if you may have pinpointed what your limitations are, that might have been last week. You may not have the same limitations the next week. You see what I'm saying? It's static. It's not fixed. So don't limit yourself. All right. So now she says here, that oh, this is where I was like, oh, it kind of took me back. So the proposal. So Peter had, of course, he loved her so much. He loved her. He had laid out this grand proposal, but what stood out to me was the way he designed the ring. So Bosma states how she loves roses. She has an affinity towards roses. And Peter specifically designed her ring with that in mind. And I thought that was beautiful because my late husband did the same thing. He designed my engagement ring in the form of a Claydol ring. So if you've seen the Claydol or Cladea, depends on how you pronounce it. It's the two hands and then it holds something, in the middle, and it symbolizes like unity, friendship, or whatever. So he was so specific down to white gold because I love white gold. The stone in the center was my birthstone, which is the Alexandrite, and he put black diamonds on the side. So I was like, oh, that's how you know when your man loves you. It doesn't have to be like the most, that the Tiffany or whatever. When that man puts in that commitment, to pay attention to those details specific to you, that's love. That is love. And I was like, oh, I remember when I had a ring designed like me for that. All right, so she spoke about like Peter's proposal, and they wanted to honor both traditions. So Peter was Roman Catholic and she was Ghanaian and Christian. So she said that, they had two weddings, but they had them on the same day so that their anniversary could be the same date no matter what. And then she kind of spoke about how, the Ghanaian proposal is different from an American proposal because you're deciding as a Ghanaian that you're marrying the family. It's a unification of the families, not just the individuals. So the proposal is like this big to do. Like, you go over to the family's home. I guess the groom gets rejected. I guess to show how hard he's willing to work for the bride's love, which I love that. They also, I guess they'll bring out if you're gonna like marry this girl, so they'll have the girl covered up, and that way when the groom to be reveals her, he notices that that's his woman, and if he still wants to marry the same woman. So they played that trick with her sister, one of her sisters, and he was like, no, this isn't the woman I want to marry. So his family was kind of appalled by that, and her family was just dying laughing because Peter had passed the test. And so let me see if I wrote notes on. Oh, yes, yes. So once they went through that, then the father, Peter paid the dowry to the father. And then once all of that was finished, she officially belonged to the St. John's. So then we go into the Catholic wedding. So she said that this one was different from the Ghanaian wedding because her and Peter had paid for everything themselves. Her father's words, again, echoed throughout, her time with him. And she says that their first song they danced to was Sade's By Your Side from the Lovers Rock anthem. Not anthem, album. And she said they had an inscription. I'm not sure if it was By Your Side or Lovers Rock in their ring, but they had an inscription within their rings inspired by the song in the album. She said everything was good, everything was fine until family started to get involved. And they were kind of able to like navigate around that, but the ultimate threat or, challenge on their marriage was when her father had to move in, post divorce. So this is where the Love Interrupted title comes from. I thought it was going to be speaking about her and Peter, but no, this speaks about the demise of her parents' marriage. So she spoke about how her father's spontaneity and constant ambition eventually began to take a toll on her mother because her mother was always the one that had to get up and, pick up the pieces. Like he'd literally have an idea, oh, I want to get this degree. It doesn't matter where we live. And she would be the one left getting the house together, packing the kids, like making the arrangements for everyone to go to school. That's a lot. That's a lot. And that is kind of inconsiderate of, the person. You always have to have that conversation. But again, with him being a man, and he probably was thinking in his mind where I'm doing this for us. He didn't think that he had to have a conversation. So she said, this is when he's already got 3 degrees. So they're already established. They're older. he all of a sudden decided he wanted to go to Duke for a professional program. And the mom was like, nope, we're not doing that, and decided to say, we're done. So, due to that, her father ended up having to move in with her and Peter. And I believe they lived together, what she said was 6 months or a year. But all right. When her dad moved in, it highlighted a lot for her. She said she started to look at things a little different, looked at him different, even looked at Peter different. She looked at her father different because she recalls when they drove to pick him up from North Carolina, because I guess that's where he was living, driving from New York, no less. She said she remembered when she got there, this man had not even packed a box. He hadn't packed anything. So then she was like, I didn't realize my dad was so, like, he appeared one way to me as a child, but now seeing him as an individual, I see that he is, he's kind of like a child. Like he doesn't really know how to fend for himself. And of course, that's due to her mother doing all of the back end work. You never realize that back end work and how it's relieving you. So she was like, all right, I guess, my dad is, like my child, and I got to live with it. But Peter, so this is when she started to see their birth orders kind of conflict. Now remember, she's the oldest of four. Peter's the youngest of six. So their stance on responsibility, familial responsibility, was totally different, because in her culture, the oldest steps in, when the parents are, kind of like not in a position to do that anymore. And since their parents were divorcing, she had to kind of step in as the surrogate third parent. So kind of be that role model for her sisters, step in and help her parents wherever they needed individually. And she said that was kind of hard, on both ends, because her mother was so heartbroken and still bitter about the demise of the marriage, but she didn't want to hear anything negative about her father. But then her father, kind of behaved like a child that she always had to, kind of like shepherd along the way. And that was putting a strain on her and Peter, because Peter, being the youngest, he was telling her, look, your parents are grown. You're not responsible for them. And I'll admit, I'm kind of like in the same boat as Peter, because unlike Bozoma, I've always kind of had to show up as the adult with my parents. So I was never able to rely on them or even see them as, somewhat of a somewhat like what parents are supposed to, guardians that show you the way. Like, they, even to this day, they can't show me the way. So I'm with Peter in that more individual approach, because you only get one life, and you cannot like put your life in jeopardy to help out someone who doesn't want to get out of their own way. And those are my parents. So she had already had that instilled in her based on how she was raised. And, come hell or high water, she was going to show up for her dad. But again, knowing your limitations, she realized that that wouldn't work anymore. And then her father ended up going to go live with her sister in LA. Let me see. I think I covered all of that. Yeah. Oh, okay. So yeah, I didn't highlight anything, so I can just read this last piece of note, and then we'll go to chapter 7. So she said one of the things she noticed about her dad is that he was kind of selfish. He demanded more from others than he did of himself. So she had to just be honest with herself about that. And him living with them for the first year put stress on their marriage. But once he moved away, they were able to buy their first apartment. And, that's what gave her the gumption to tell him, you know what, after living with you, I want to give my marriage a chance. This is a big investment for us, and basically deuces. But dad wasn't bitter about that. He understood, and he left. He went to LA. So now we get to chapter 7. This was a good chapter. This chapter is called Cracked Wide Open. So she starts out with Peter. This is a scene where now they're in the time where he's, nearing his last days. She said Peter struggled to swallow. So he was really, his body was shutting down, and he barely ate. So that's part of the reason he also lost weight. However, she made his favorite dish, lasagna, and he did not, he struggled to eat it, but he ate that dish all the way through. She said it took him about an hour to eat it. And then she goes into the history as to why that was such a meaningful dish and like moment for her. So we go back to a period where they're visiting Peter's mom, and Peter's mom just asks her if she knows how to make lasagna. So she says she didn't know if that was a test or a trap. And she said, no, he doesn't make lasagna. I mean, I don't know how to make lasagna. But then, a sassy girl, she looked at, because the mom was like, well, this Peter's favorite. You're going to have to learn how to make it from scratch because none of that Stouffer's frozen stuff. So then she asked Peter, well, do you know how to make it since it's your favorite dish? And I'm like, exactly. That's how I am with my mother's in-laws. It's like, you ain't about to stress me out and put your shit on me. It's not happening, honey. Some say that's disrespectful, but it's like sometimes you got to draw lines. But so I understood where she was coming from with that. And then once she said that she didn't know how to make it because Peter didn't know how to make it either, her mother-in-law offered to teach her. So then she goes back to another reference when she's speaking about, times when she was growing up, because she said cooking wasn't an issue for her. Her mother cooked all the time. She recalls her mother waking up. She would hear pots and pans in the kitchen, even if it was, on a Saturday where she wanted to rest. If she heard her mother cooking in the kitchen, she ran down there, her and her siblings ran down there to help her mother. And then she referenced jollof rice. Is it jollof or jollof? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that wrong. But she said that that's like a Ghanaian woman's just, if you don't know that, like there's something lacking within you. It's like a rite of passage for them to cook that. And there's even like competition between Ghanaians and Nigerians on who makes the best jollof rice. Because that's where I first heard it referenced, was through Nigerians. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize there was a difference, in how they prepared it. But I guess there is. So I'd like to try and see what that difference is one day. So she likened jollof rice, the preparation for that, because I guess you have to take your time. You can't rush the process, the same way as cooking lasagna from scratch. And so she said that there was one time where her in-laws came to eat dinner with her and Peter for the first time, or one of the first few times. And she doesn't understand why she decided to cook lasagna as opposed to her native meal, but I guess she wanted to make an impression. So she made the lasagna from scratch. She says she remember watching Peter and his father like demolish it. I guess they loved it. But Peter's mother was kind of like quiet and hesitant and really didn't she didn't indulge as much as they did. And she said due to that, she was watching everyone's face. She's watching Peter's mom's face to see if she's looking at them, the father and Peter, to see if maybe they're just eating the food to be nice. And, she she thought the same thing, like, was this really good? Because she hasn't even touched it. So she took a bite. It was slamming. And then the mother kind of gave her, with a little bit of trepidation, her stamp of approval. She, instead of being so enthused about it like the father and Peter was, she was like, oh, it's good, Bozema. I'm like, oh man, these mother-in-laws sometimes, right? So she says that lasagna was a symbol of their first years of marriage. Like she prepared that quite often for Peter once she got into the groove of it. And she remembers Peter always coming home from work, appreciating that. And, she loved cooking that dish for him. She said that they were steeped in happiness in their first few years, but then the cracks began to kind of creep in, and she started to see their differences. And remind you, she still has these words of her father echoing in the background. So she said things like down to like their religious beliefs, because he was Roman Catholic and has certain beliefs, and she was Christian and has certain beliefs. Even like how they woke up, just how they showed up in the world, his ambition versus her ambition. He was kind of like steady wins the race. He had already achieved what he needed to achieve, and I guess was achieved like approaching it that traditional way where you just kind of rise up the ladder slowly, whereas she was like ambitious. If she didn't feel comfortable somewhere, she got right out and would always switch jobs. Which on one hand, I see Peter's way, because I'm like that. I'd rather be constant. But on the other hand, I understand that you do have to try different things and build your career. Like I have a VP, the VP that hired me when I was an intern, when I became an intern for Total Rewards. Like she does that. Like I watch her on LinkedIn and I notice she's always moving around. And I used to kind of I didn't look at it at first, and then I started to critique it because I was like, well, that's a little unstable, right? But sometimes people stay places longer than where they need to be. So I get that because that's a part of your career development, right? You got to go out there and try different things. And in Bozema's case, while she's got a long resume, it's served her well. This lady was able to hit the C-suite before she was 50. So keep that in mind. So, you know, I mean, I might take a page out of her book on that one. All right, so she mentioned again like how their differences began to cause a rift, and one thing that she didn't understand about Peter was she didn't like that he would advise her against trusting her intuition and going after certain things. And then she started to kind of question like, well, where was he coming from with that? Was he trying to protect me, or was he trying to prevent me from achieving greatness? And so she said she began to resent him because she didn't understand that. And that's when more cracks began to show up in their relationship. So she recalled a time where they attended a newlywed game at one of their first events they went to as a couple. It was with Black Enterprise. It was a golf tournament. And then she spoke about one of the events that they had in the itinerary was the newlywed game. And she was so nervous about like them answering the questions and being in unison. And come to find out, you know, they were in unison. They answered a question the same way. But there was a section, I have it here, for from page 138. And let me read this because when I highlight them, it's usually for a reason, right? So, all right. Yes. Okay. So this is, like I said, they play the newlywed game, and she's glad that they're in unison and in agreement with the answers because they ended up winning. And then she states, I knew this, and this is page 138, sorry, in chapter 7. I knew this sense of ease on display on the nights we went to a Black club and during family dinners at my parents' home was due in part to his simply being a white man who felt intuitively that the world was his. There was no place that would deny him entry, no space where he couldn't go. The idea that he might be excluded or mistreated never entered his consciousness, whereas it lurked on the edge of mine nearly every day. But I felt Peter's comfort was also a testament to how much he loved me. Of course, he embraced Blackness, I thought, the culture that has shaped me. How could he not? Outsiders, however, continued to ask questions. So that's basically, I guess, the feeling that resonated within her, how Peter was kind of just never really afraid, never had like any doubts whenever he would show up in spaces. And she was always, in her mind, she had doubts because she's walking a different life than he is. She's in a different set of situations than he is, different pair of shoes. So that was one thing she always looked at as like, okay, how he shows up in the world. Because even at that newlywed game, she's all nervous about winning and he could care less. He's just going with the flow. So she had a little bit of an edge in her, and she just, you know, admired Peter's bravado and his confidence to just show up as a white man. But that's a privilege because we don't always get that. So, all right. So she said that she left Spike Lee's agency after working there for 4 years. And then there was a period where she was working like a whole bunch of jobs. She was a writer at one point, and I think she said she was even a recruiter. And that became mundane. She got tired of it. So Spike called her back to return to the agency, this time as a like an executive within creativity. But it was going to be a pay cut from what she was making at her job, I guess, as a recruiter. However, it was going to feed her career. I've actually mentioned something like this on one of my, if you go to my playlist, I have my Life, Legacy, Learn playlist, or what have you. And I do talk about a time where it's good for you to step back sometimes so that you can go forward. So I totally understood that move and her taking that pay cut because it did serve her well. She gained a little bit more experience. That problematic boss was still there, so she ended up leaving, but she gained a little bit more experience and actually got the opportunity to work for Pepsi. So working in a creative aspect with Pepsi. What did she say her role was? Oh my gosh, okay. I forgot what the role was, but she had a creative executive role with Pepsi on their campaign. She was their campaign manager. There we go. Ooh, takes sometimes you a little time to remember. All right, so I highlighted this part because it's kind of a side note, but it lends itself into the Black experience for a woman. So she said one day, when she was working at a global advertising agency, this was Arnold Worldwide, and this was after she had left Spike Lee's agency, and she had worked for this agency for 3 months, but she worked with this this white lady that it it wasn't the best working environment. So she said one day when she was working there, she decided to just do something drastic, as we all do, when we're going through challenges, we want to make changes. And she cut her hair. She did a pixie cut. So she said she had worn braids and extensions for a long period of time, and she would always have weave going down her back, but she just, I guess, wanted to free herself of that. And after she cut her hair, she had went to the office. I'm not going to read it because it's getting, the time is at my 41-minute mark, and it's actually going longer than I want. But she said she got to a point where she just wanted to cut her hair, went into the office, and she remembered that lady saying to her, well, Peter, men like Peter love long hair. And so she had that insecurity looming in her, because that is true. Like women, Black women in particular, we have a plight when it comes to hair. Like we go through so many emotions. Like right now I'm wearing a protective style because I don't want to put chemicals in my hair, but I'm working out and I'm sweating a lot. So you do what you have to do to protect your hair, but those are the types of things that we don't have the privilege of having. Like we can't just have a wash and go. We have to have contingencies in place just for us to, show our beauty. And so even down to the natural cuts, which are more embraced now, but I guess back then, they were still, what's the word I'm looking for? Stigma behind that. There you go. So, she decided, when she cut her hair, that's what she needed to do. And with what that lady said, it did place that insecurity in her. So when she went home to Peter that night, she wasn't sure how he would receive it, but come to find out, Peter loved it. And she said that made her appreciate him more. But again, the insecurities, because of what was echoing in the back of her mind and like some of the things she was noticing they were going through, she had this moment of reflection. Now, this is from page 142. I do have to read this one. She says, what if he woke up one day and said, enough of this. I don't want to worry about hair products or the rules or my wife yelling out that I'm her man because she feels slighted. I want some peace. Yet, Peter helped me through my uncertainty. As my kinks bloomed into full-on afro because she decided to go natural, his love was steadfast. I felt sure it could never fade. I really appreciated that, because there was a time, and it's so funny, again, I say we have like overlap and parallel lives. I had actually cut my hair, and so I cut my hair really short when I was with my late husband, and I decided because while my hair was short, I got pregnant, so I didn't want to put chemicals in my hair, and my afro was growing out. And when I tell you that man loved me for that, he loved me for that. He loved my Afrocentric features. He loved that, and he even loved when I would wear weaves. He just loved me for however I showed up, and that is something that we wish we could get. Well, I wish. I'm not going to speak for all Black women when it comes to Black men, but Black men sometimes, because they have their own things, because we all deal with something within the community, depending on the Black man, it's not all Black men, but they're not as embracing to that. In fact, the person I was with before then had made a comment about Black women not wearing their hair all the time. And that was one of the things where I had to realize, okay, he may not be for me, because if he thinks like this when he's got a Black mother and Black family members, but he's a Black man, he's not as evolved as I need him to be with me, because you need to be able to take me on all fronts if you want me to take you on all fronts. So when she recalled that, I was like, yeah, I get that. Get that 100%. You're always going to have those insecurities. Let me see. I think I highlighted. Oh, I already read that, so we're good. All right, so the cracks. So this situation, this is when she started to see, all right, maybe, people were right about the type of things we would have to go through because we were in a racial marriage. So she recalls a time where it was her friend Leander, her husband, I think his name was Ray, and Peter. They all went to a casino in Connecticut, and there was a waitress there that was just throwing out microaggressions. They could tell she was kind of racist, and Peter noticed that. So Peter was like getting upset, and he told Ray, he's like, "I'm sorry, I need to go speak to her." And Bozeman said, "No, don't go speak to her. It'll make it worse." So then he apologized again to Ray and Leander, like, "I'm so sorry for her." Like, basically, saying, "All right, I know that's wrong." And then Ray made a comment and said, "You don't have to apologize. You're one of us." She said as soon as he said that, she watched Peter's face, and he didn't, like, settle into a feeling of solidarity. She didn't get solidarity from his body language. She got that he was like, "Oh shit, that's how you see me? No, I'm not one of you." And that bothered her because the way she interpreted that was a reminder, a silent reminder no less, from him that, yeah, while I may have a black wife and I love her, I'm not black and I don't want to be black. See, there's a difference. She got that from that exchange, like that was a disdain of his, like, no, I'm not black. And she said that always stuck with her. She even recalled a time where, and this was during George Floyd, and Peter's passed, by this time, because this is 2020 and Peter passed in 2013. But one of Peter's friends, Mike, sent her a photo of him marching with Black Lives Matter in solidarity. And she said Peter was a staunch Republican. And she wondered if he would have felt the same way. And she said, painfully, given the experiences that she had with him, she doesn't think that he would have supported her, and it hurt her to have to, be in the reality of that. That's crazy because my late husband was he was a silent Republican. Like, again, 2016, I think I mentioned this in one of my recaps. 2016 was our first election together, and we were on separate ends. So after that election, we didn't discuss where we stood. But what I can say is during the George Floyd incident, he didn't speak much, but his mother was very vocal and she was very supportive of Trump. And I do remember having a kind of like windmill for myself, when I would speak to her. And yeah, you really do see the divide in, people when you're in an interracial relationship when it comes to racial issues, and you do have to pick a side. Kind of, like I mentioned when she was at school. She said that she had to stay off of social media too around that time because Peter's family was posting things like All Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. So it was just a reminder for her that, yep, not going to go there, not going to fall for that. And, just respect the differences. So she said that based off that day, the cracks got deeper. She said that Peter's comfort and privilege bothered her. And it sounds like she was coming from a place of like resentment and jealousy of him because of how he could show up, because she called it white arrogance. And, she always had to, protect herself as a Black woman. So the fact that Peter could just show up and be whoever he was and not have any issue with it, in her country, no less, because she remembered a trip that they had in Ghana, that they had taken to Ghana, and Peter was just, doing his thing, and she would have to remind him there's certain customs that he has to respect, and just out of naivete and not knowing, he would sometimes disregard that. And again, she took that as like, this is him just showing up in his privilege, and that's kind of arrogant and ignorant, and I don't like it. So she, began to have a little bit more resentment towards him, and I get that. She said that marriage, so, if you have an honest conversation with people about marriage, healthily though, because you don't want to talk to people and they steer you down the wrong way. She says that, people really can't talk about the hurdles until they go through them. And I mean, living is the best learning lesson. So she said that she didn't discover, you know, how different they were until they were going through those hurdles. And she was just trying to figure out how to navigate through them the best that she could. And then the biggest thing that they hadn't discussed, where she saw there was a clear divide, was on the subject of children. So Peter wanted to have kids. This is about 4 years after they've been married. And she didn't think about having kids. So she was still taking her birth control. And, you know, magically she somehow ended up getting pregnant. I'm gonna assume this is with her first child, Eve, because this is 2008. So if Eve was born, and this was March of 2008, so then Eve would have been born in December or January of 2009. So yeah, I think it was with Eve, because I think she got pregnant with Lael, no, like really quickly after she had Eve stillborn. So yeah, so now they're pregnant, and we'll talk more about that in the next chapter. I hope you got something out of that recap. I feel like I was kind of bouncing all over the place, but y'all know how I do, but I think you love me anyway, right? All right, I ran over you know, the time that I do kind of want to allot for myself with this recap. So I do apologize for that. But if you enjoyed it, you know, please comment, share your thoughts on it, you know, at the bottom. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, as well as comment, or in addition to comment, right? All right, my friends, peace and blessings to you all. I hope you have a fabulous day or evening, or whatever time of the day you are watching this. Much love, all right? Bye.